24, appraisal income approaches. So this unit discusses two income approaches to appraisal: capitalization and gross rent multiplier, and concludes with appraisal math discussion. So this topic, we're going to cover capitalization approach, capitalization rate, the IRV formula, gross rent multiplier, appraisal math calculations. All right, so you're going to do some independent study. I'll go over the unit summary and the unit quiz. So in the unit summary, these are the key points you need to remember during your exam. Capitalization is the process of converting net income into value. So whenever you convert net income into value, that's called capitalization. Net income into value. The economic life is the remaining period over which the building will be economically beneficial to the owner. So it's called the economic life. The capitalization rate is the rate of return the market indicates investors' desire. And investment risk increases, cap rate increases. So again, as investment risk increases, so if you're taking more investment risk, what also increases? Your cap rate, your capitalization rate increases. The formula for estimating value using the capitalization method is value equals net income divided by your cap rate. The gross rent multiplier method is used to value smaller income properties. The formula to calculate a gross rent multiplier is gross rent multiplier equals the sales price of a comp divided by the rent. The formula to calculate using a gross rent multiplier is going to be value equals the rate of the subject times or multiplied by the gross rent multiplier. So value equals rent of subject times GRM, which is the gross rent multiplier. Reconciliation is the process of bringing all appraisal data together to estimate a final value. So number one, the income approach would be relied on most heavily in estimating the value of what? This one's going to be alpha, an office building. So an office building is where the income approach would be relied on most heavily in estimating the value, is where you're going to have an office building. So typically generating, income by an office building generates a lot of income, or the purpose is to generate income in an office. So in an office building, you're going to use an income approach. That's what's most heavily in estimating the value. So a cooperative apartment, no. Municipal building, no. Vacant land, no. Number two, a rental property has 6 rental units that rent for $700 each per month. A similar property in the area sold for $700,000. What would be the annual gross rent multiplier for this type of property? Answer is delta D, 13.8. So a rental property has 6 rental units that rent for $700 each per month. Similar property in the area sold for $700,000. what will be the annual gross rent multiplier for this type of property? So you're going to need to do some little bit of math. So capitalization is a process used to what? Capitalization is a process used to convert income into value. So what do we use? What is capitalization? It's to convert income into value. So income, like an office building, we use the income approach. Whenever you have income, capitalization is going to try to convert that income into value. An apartment building has a total income of $140,000 per year. The yearly expenses are taxes $18,000, repairs $3,000, insurance $10,000, and miscellaneous expenses are $7,000. If a buyer pays $720,000 for the building, what will be the net return? So again, you got to do some math behind the scenes to get $102,000. The rate of return that an investor expects to receive, or what the property is producing, is known as capitalization rate. So capitalization rate, again, is the rate of return that an investor expects to receive, right? Capitalization rate is the rate of return that an investor expects to receive, or that the property is producing, is known as capitalization rate. It's the rate of return that an investor expects to receive on that, or that property is producing. That's the cap rate. Is it interest rate? No. Annual percentage rate? No. Gross income multiplier? No. When developing a cap rate, one would not consider what? Replacement cost. So when developing a cap rate, right, and we said cap rate, capitalization converts income into value. So when developing a cap rate, you wouldn't consider replacing it. Would you consider comps, comparable sales and income? Yes. Investment alternatives? Yes. Risk? Yeah. So the higher the risk, the higher the cap rate, right? The letters in IRV represent which of the following terms? So alpha, so net income, rate, and value. So IRV is net income, rate, and value. Net income, rate, and value. Net income, rate, and value. So letters in IRV represent which of the following terms? Net, right? And we always talk about net, not gross. We want the net income, rate, and value. So is it net income, rate, and cost? No. Gross income, rate, and cost? No. Gross income, rate, and value? No. Number 8, if interest rates rise, what effect would this have on commercial property with a long-term fixed rent lease? So this would be delta. Property value would decrease. So if interest rates rise, what effect would this have on commercial property with a long-term fixed rent lease? So property values would decrease. So delta, property value would decrease. So if you have your interest rate, if they go up, right? So right now, market values, interest rates, around 6%, 7%. If those go higher, 10, 11%, what effect would this have on commercial properties with a long-term fixed rent lease? Property values would decrease, right? Because your interest rate is so much higher, right? 10, 12, 13%, the payments are higher. So typically the property values would go down. So the cap rate would decrease. No. Property value would increase. No. So, it wouldn't make sense, right? If you have high property values and high interest rate, there's not going to be any movement, no purchases or sales. Nobody's going to buy anything because everything's too high, and also the interest rate's too high. So interest rate goes high, the property values go down. When the cap rate goes up, value does what? Goes down. So cap rate goes up, value goes down, right? Interest goes up, cap rate goes down, value goes down, right? So the value goes up, no. Remains the same, no. Will be lowered, dollar to dollar, no. Compared to the physical life of a building, the economic life is what? Shorter. So compared to the physical life of a building, the economic life is shorter. So is it longer? No. The same? No. Based on the same type of improvement? No. So compared to the physical life of a building, the economic, right? So there's your physical building. The economic life of a building is, the economic life is shorter. So again, compared to the physical life of a building, the economic life is shorter. Right? The process by which data is resolved into a final estimate of value is what? Alpha, reconciliation. So reconciliation is the process by which data is resolved into a final estimate of value. Is it capitalization? No. Comparison? No. Summation? No. The appraisal approach, which has the greatest validity on a multi-family rental property, is what? It is Charlie, income. So the appraisal approach, which has the greatest validity on a multi-family rental property, is income. Appraisal approach, which has the greatest validity on a multi-family rental property, is income. Is it comparison? No. Cost? No. Market data? No. All the following items are used in the income approach except what? It is delta, accrued depreciation. So all the following items are used in the income approach except accrued depreciation. So is it market rents? Yes. Income approach. So like an office, you use the income approach. So market rents, yeah. Expenses, yes. Rate of return, yes. Accrued depreciation, that does not get taken into a place for income approach. The approach most heavily relied on in estimating the value of a 20-unit apartment building is the what? Is the delta income approach. So again, the approach most heavily relied on in estimating the value 20-unit apartment building. So kind of like an office building, apartment building, what do they use? They use the income approach because they're generating income. Apartments, they bring income. Office building, like a dental office building, any type of office building, they're used to generate income, right? So you use the income approach, which basically goes off of market rents, expenses, the rate of return. They do not use accrued depreciation, but that's the approach when you use the appraisal, right? Income approach is going to be based on apartments or office buildings. A commercial space pays $400 per month for rent and 4% of their $750,000 annual income. What is the average monthly rent? So it's going to be $2,900. So you need to do some math. The buyer wants 11% return. The property rents for $1,500 per month, and annual expenses are $4,000. What is the price the buyer is willing to pay? So the answer here is going to be Charlie, $127,000. So again, you got to do some math. The gross rent multiplier is calculated by delta dividing the sales price by the gross rents. So gross rent multiplier is calculated by how? You divide the sales price by the gross rents. GRM, gross rent multiplier. Divide the sales price by the gross rent. Divide the sales price by the gross rent. So do you divide the gross rent by the sale price? No. Divide the rent income by the sale price? No. Do you divide the sale price by the net income? No. You divide the sale price by the gross rent to get the gross rent multiplier. Which of the following statements is true? It's going to be Charlie. A decrease in the cap rate produces an increase in the appraised value. So a decrease in the cap rate produces an increase in the appraised value. So a couple of questions ago, we were saying what happens if the interest rate goes up, the value goes down. Similarly, if the cap rate goes down, the value goes up. So they're inversely related to each other. So whenever you think of interest rate, if your interest rates are dropping, your property values are going what? They're increasing. And if your property values are increasing, then your interest rates are probably doing what? They're probably decreasing. So because they're inversely proportional to each other. So if you have low interest rates, you can think that the values are rising in that particular time. So the cap rate is determined by dividing the value by the net income? No. The cap rate will be higher for a property where a long-term tenant has shown a good record of payment than for one with a relatively new tenant with a poor record of payment? No. A decrease in the cap rate produces an increase in the appraised value? Yes. An increase in the cap rate produces an increase in the appraised value? No. So they're not one-to-one. They're not a direct correlation, they're an inverse correlation. So increase in interest rate leads to a decrease in the value of the house. In using the income approach, an appraiser must establish what? Bravo, capitalization rate. And using an income approach. So income approach like like an office building or apartment complex, those use income approach because they generate a lot of income. But an appraiser would establish a what? Establish a capitalization rate. So he needs to figure out what the cap rate is to determine how much income is generated in the properties or in the office, dental office, whatever it is. Then you must establish a discount rate? No. Cap rate? Yes. Interest rate? No. An expense rate? No. A property that produces $3,000 in net income per year was valued using a cap rate of 7.5%. Its value is, bravo, $40,000. So you're going to need to do some math on that one. All right, so we're going to go into Unit 25, talk about environmental issues. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency, the ADEQ, is the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. It should be WR, it's the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Most buildings built prior to 1978 contain lead paint, and buyers must be given disclosure of the potential for lead paint in homes built prior to 1978. Buyers and tenants of pre-1978 homes must be given a lead paint booklet and have 10 days to rescind the contract. So what does rescind mean? It means to cancel the contract. You got 10 days to cancel. Radon is naturally occurring radioactive gas that can cause lung cancer. Asbestos, when friable, creates tiny airborne particles that can cause respiratory diseases. The common method of abating Asbestos is encapsulation. Mold is caused by excess moisture in buildings. Airtight windows and doors can contribute to mold. So you want to have ventilation, right? If everything is super airtight, airtight windows, airtight doors, they can contribute to mold. So you want to have some ventilation. Uh, Mold is going to be caused by excess moisture in the building. So it's too much moisture in the building can create mold. Expansive soils absorb water and can exert pressure on foundation, causing cracks and fractures. Fissures, cracks in the ground caused by overdraft of groundwater. Sick building syndrome may cause people who live or work in the building to suffer illness. Right. So again, if you have a sick building, maybe you have a lot of mold growing, or expansive soils, or environmental issues that could cause people to suffer an illness. Brownfield is an abandoned commercial or industrial site containing hazardous waste. So if you hear something called brown field, that's a term for a commercial building that has hazardous waste. It's called a brownfield. Phase one assessment involves an inspection of a property and a review of the use history and public records. Phase two assessment involves sampling the ground and analyzing the samples to determine if contamination exists. A phase three assessment is the remediation of any contamination. Superfund is a contaminated site designated by the federal government under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act. WQARF site is a contaminated site designated by the state of Arizona and may be remediated through funds available from the Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund. Current and previous owners have strict liability for remediation of contaminated sites. A floodplain is a flat portion of land along a river or stream that may flood. FEMA maps indicate if a property is in a floodplain. So again, sometimes if you're in a rural area, you're more prone to be in a floodplain, so you need to check that. Go to the monsoon. So if you go into MLS and you click on the little tab monsoon, the FEMA, go all the way down, FEMA maps, it'll tell you if you're in a floodplain. The National Flood Insurance Program provides flood insurance to homeowners. Flood elevation certificate is used to rate flood insurance policies. If an Arizona property has an on-site waterway system and is sold, the system must be inspected within 6 months prior to the sale. The buyer must be given a copy of the report. Buyer must complete a notice of transfer within 15 days after the purchase. A percolation test determines the soil's ability to absorb and drain water. So again, what does a percolation test do? It's going to determine the soil's ability to absorb water and drain water. That's called a perk test. LEED, LEED, is an environmental building certification. Stands for Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design. Energy Star is a federal government-backed symbol indicating a high level of energy efficiency. All right, so number one, mold can be associated with what? Alpha, airtight windows. So if you have airtight windows, no ventilation can occur. What can occur? Mold. What will occur? Mold. Right. So you don't want airtight windows. You want Sound ventilation. Um, can mold be associated with insulation? No. Inferior grade building materials? No. Low moisture conditions? No, it'd be high moisture conditions. A lot of wet, high. If it's too wet, right? If the moisture is too high, that's what creates mold in the house. The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA, established what? So it established the Superfunds to bear costs of cleanup. So CERCLA established Charlie Superfunds to bear costs of cleanup. That's what CERCLA established. Did CERCLA establish homeowners' responsibility to clean up polluted property? No. Environmental Protection Act, EPA? No. Superfunds to bear costs of cleanup? Yes. State environmental standards? No. A government-backed program for energy efficiency in homes and appliances is what? Is Energy Star. A government-backed program for energy efficiency in homes and appliances is Energy Star. So it depends on how many Energy Star you have. Tells you how efficiency it is, how efficient the program is. So a government-backed program for energy efficiency in home and appliances is Energy Star. Is it leadership and environmental energy sign? No. U.S. Green Building Council? No. Arizona Department of Environmental Quality? No. A building certification issued by the U.S. Green Building Council that rates buildings on their design, construction, operation, and maintenance is what? Is Bravo, the Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design, LEED. So it's a building certification issued by the U.S. Green Building Council that rates buildings on their design, construction, operation, and maintenance. It's called LEED. It's a building certification. LEED is a building certification. So is it Energy Star? No. Is it U.S. Green Building Council? No. Arizona Department of Environmental Quality? No. A property is designated as being within a Superfund site, but the property receives water from the wells, which are not contaminated. The broker must, Bravo, make the disclosure, but can provide information about the water. So make the disclosure, but can provide information about the water. So again, a property is designated as being within a Superfund site, but the property receives water from the wells, which are not contaminated. The broker must make the disclosure and provide information about the water. So can they not disclose that is within a Superfund site? No. If it's a material fact, which this is, you have to disclose. Not make the disclosure because the broker represents the seller. No. Refer the buyer to the Environmental Protection Agency. No. Number 6, a brownfield in an area causes a loss in value to neighboring properties. This is an example of alpha, economic obsolescence. So we talked about economic obsolescence. It's comparing your subject property, your house, to your neighborhood, really. So a brownfield, right? That's like a commercial property that's has some hazardous material in there. So a brownfield in an area causes a loss in value to neighboring properties. This is an example of economic obsolescence. That's called a brownfield. So, economic obsolescence is the hardest thing to cure or help because you're fighting the environment around you. Say, you have a brown field commercial building that has a lot of asbestos in it, or something like that, but it's your neighbor, it's in your neighborhood, that's going to be hard to cure. Inspection report valid for 6 months, half a year. So 1 month, no. 3 months, no. 12 months, no. Property with no environmental contamination is being sold. To eliminate any potential liability for the buyer, under CERCLA, the buyer should, have the seller remediate the problem and obtain the necessary government certification of the cleanup prior to closing. So again, have the seller remediate the problem and obtain the necessary government certification of the cleanup prior to closing. So again, a property with no environmental contaminations being sold. To eliminate any potential liability for the buyer, under CERCLA, the buyer should what? Have the seller remediate the problem and obtain the necessary government certification of the cleanup prior to closing. Should they close the transaction, obtain an elevation certificate from the seller? No. Obtain a phase 2 assessment, which will insure against any potential liability for the buyer? No. Have the escrow company retain any seller funds that are necessary for cleanup and perform the remediation after closing? No. They should just have the seller remediate the problem and obtain the necessary government certification of the cleanup prior to closing. What type of test is done to determine the ground's ability to allow water to seep through it? So this one's going to be Bravo, percolation. So percolator, percolation, that's water goes through soil and the soil to seep through it and to drain. That is a percolation test. So what type of test done to determine the ground's ability to allow it to seep through it and also to drain? That is a percolation test, percolated, where the ground's ability to seep through the water. So is it compaction? No. Fissure? No. Expansive soil? No. The notice of transfer from form for a septic system must be filled with the ADEQ within how many days? Or within how long? This one's going to be Bravo, 15 days after closing. So the notice of transfer form for a septic system. So again, how long do you have? A septic system inspection report, how long is it valid for? 6 months. The notice of transfer form for a septic system must be filed with ADQ within how long? 15 days after closing. So after you close on a property, you have 15 days notice of transfer form for a septic system to be filed with the ADEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. So 15 days after the inspection, no. 15 days after closing, yes. 6 months after the inspection, no. 6 months after closing, no. The method used to treat asbestos is called encapsulation. So encapsulation, that is the method to use to treat asbestos, right? What's hazardous to the lungs, it's a friable substance. So encapsulation is used to encapsulate asbestos. So ventilation, no. Capping, no. Evaporation, no. It's encapsulation. So you encapsulate asbestos. That's used to treat. How do you treat it? Is Encapsulation. What must a property manager deliver to the tenant when renting a residential property which was constructed prior to 1978? So what must a property manager deliver? A lead paint addendum attached to the lease. So it is going to be alpha lead paint addendum. So you need to disclose, you need to tell them that if it was built prior to 1978, it probably has lead-based paint. The paint is lead-based. So it's hazardous to humans. So you have to disclose that. Any house built prior to 1978 has to come with an addendum saying that there's lead-based paint. The paint is lead-based. So receiving the lead-based paint disclosure, it's going to be alpha 10 days. Now, typically on any inspection, you always have 10 days by default, unless in the purchase contract you write something else. I've seen people write 7 days, 5 days. Investors give 0 days sometimes. So, what is the time period that a home buyer has to inspect the property when receiving the lead-based paint disclosure? By default, is 10 days, but it could be shorter. It actually could be longer. So there's a blank space that you can write in there what it is. Default is 10 days. So 14, no. 30, no. By close of escrow, no. Under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, with regards to the cleanup of toxic waste spills, the current and previous owners have what type of responsibility? It's going to be Charlie. They have strict liability. So the current and previous owners have what type of responsibility? Strict liability. So under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, CERCLA, with regards to the cleanup of toxic waste spills, the owners have strict liability. So do they have single liability? No. Several liability? No. Fractional liability? No. Strict liability. 15. CERCLA liability generally attaches 4 broad categories of parties responsible for cleanup of contamination from a particular site. All the following parties would be responsible except who? Delta Real Estate Brokerage, who arranged the transaction. So again, real estate brokerage, who arranged the transaction. That's when CERCLA liability generally attaches 4 broad categories of parties responsible for cleanup of contamination. Definitely the owners. They have the strict liability for a particular site. Maybe if they have a phase 1, 2, 3 inspection. All the following parties would be responsible except who? So the real estate brokers, they wouldn't be responsible. But do the current owners and operators of the site do? Yes. The past owners or operators at the time of sale do? Yes. Persons who arranged for disposal of hazardous substances do? Yes. So the current owners, the past owners, and the person who arranged for disposal. A broker selling a property which was built in 1952 must be sure that the buyer receives a notice concerning what? Concerning Delta lead-based paint. So a broker selling a property which was built in 1952. When's the cutoff? 1978. So cutoff, if it's prior to 1978, they need that disclosure for lead-based paint. After 1978, lead was not in the paint, so you don't need it. So this house built in 1952. You have to make sure that the buyer receives a notice concerning what? Radon? No. Asbestos? No. Formaldehyde, no. Lead-based paint, yes. Who's required to complete the ADEQ notice of transfer for an on-site wastewater treatment facility? So this one's going to be the buyer, Alpha. So the buyer is required to complete the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality notice of transfer for an on-site wastewater treatment facility. So does the seller have to complete that? No. Broker? No. Escrow? No. Asbestos is found if found in a commercial building, what? Alpha may be encapsulated and managed in place. So how do you treat asbestos? You encapsulate it, right? Put a big background or something. So encapsulation is the treatment process for asbestos. Encapsulation. So it may be encapsulated and managed in place. B, must be removed if friable, no. May not be removed if friable, no. Must be removed prior to close of escrow, no. What new construction feature has led to an increase in mold? This one's going to be Bravo. Airtight walls and windows. Why would airtight walls and windows lead to increase in mold? Due to increase in fluid, right, in moisture in the air, right? So there's more moisture in there because they're tight. So it's not allowing the ventilation to evaporate the water, right? So more moisture in there. So airtight walls and windows have led to an increase in mold. So rain gutters, no. Recycled building materials, no. Blown insulation, no. Water quality assurance revolving fund sites are another way of describing environmentally contained sites that are regulated by who? Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. So water quality assurance revolving fund sites are another way of describing environmental contaminated sites that are regulated, right? These are regulators regulated by Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADQ. So is it comprehensive environmental response cleanup circular? No. Assured water supply regulations? No. Federal Superfund? No. Which is used to establish premiums for flood insurance? This one's going to be Alpha, elevation certificate. So how elevated is the land? Elevation certificate is used to establish premiums for flood insurance. So if you're very elevated, you should have a lower premium, right? Because you're elevated on a mountain top, right? But if you're lower elevation, then you're more prone to getting flooded on a FEMA high risk zone flood area. So an elevation certificate is used to establish premiums for flood insurance. So is it wetland designation? No. A WQARF map? No. Superfund map? No. So elevation certificate is used to establish premiums for flood insurance. Which type of business would be the least likely to have a contamination problem? So this one's going to be Bravo. Retail jewelry store. Least likely to have a contamination problem. Jewelry store. How about a dry cleaner? Yes. How about a dairy farm? Definitely. How about a sign painter? Yeah. But a jewelry store, very clean, dry, kind of like a wet room. I mean, a dry room. least likely to have contamination. Which of the following would not be considered an environmental hazard? So delta, leaking underground water storage tanks. Not be considered an environmental hazard. Leaking underground water storage tanks. So this would not be considered an environmental hazard. Leaking underground water storage tanks. So would a proximity to a dump area be considered a hazardous environmental hazard? Yes. Air pollution? Yes. Prior use of the property by a dry cleaner? Yes. So that would be considered an environmental hazard. So would leaking underground water storage tanks be considered an environmental hazard? Yes. Oh, sorry. No, it would not be considered environmental hazard. Which of the following is commonly found in miniature airborne particles? This is asbestos. So how do you combat asbestos? What do you treat it with? Encapsulation. So what is commonly found in minute airborne particles? Asbestos. These little tiny, minute airborne particles fly around. That is asbestos. Radon, no. Carbon monoxide, no. Urea, formaldehyde, no. All right, next up we'll talk about Unit 26, which is estates in real property.